Welcome to another episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, Tim Klauser, with TJ Martinell, the Center Square's Washington State investigative reporter, here to talk about the latest round of public records that TJ has gotten back from the state about the new income tax that's rolling through the courts and the state's potential legal strategy to combat it in the state Supreme Court. We know that they recently shot down a referendum. TJ has some of the behind the scenes insight into this. TJ, what records did you get in? How do you keep getting them?
Because I'm good, Tim. I'm real good. No, I got these records from the Secretary of State's office regarding the referendum on the millionaire's tax, and most of the records were redacted, but there was one draft document. It was the draft response to Let's Go Washington that the Attorney General's office was working on, and that they emailed to the Secretary of State's office. And what's interesting is it contained comments between members of the Attorney General's office. And in particular, there was this one comment by Carl Smith. He's the Deputy Solicitor General, and he's writing a message to Noah Purcell, the Solicitor General. And it's very fascinating. He's talking about a certain legal argument they were going to potentially use in their response. And he says that the state Supreme Court is as favorable. This is Noah. So Noah Purcell told Carl Smith that the state Supreme Court was as favorable a venue as we're likely to get. Carl Smith, who's a former clerk for the state Supreme Court, speculated that the state Supreme Court might allow a referendum to avoid having to deal with the question of whether income is property. And the thing that I find so interesting about this, and this goes back to the story I did initially, where Noah Purcell told Senator Jamie Peterson to put in an emergency clause to prevent a referendum, right? The implication of that is that if there was a referendum, voters would reject the millionaire's tax. What Carl Smith is implying, or one could argue he's implying, is that the state Supreme Court would allow a referendum so that voters would overturn this and they wouldn't have to deal with it. So it just really goes back to show how it's this unspoken open secret that if voters are given a chance to give their say on this tax, they would reject it.
Yeah, it's an interesting back and forth there. I mean, you have AGO staff saying, hey, look, if we want to overturn 100 years of state law saying that income is property, the state Supreme Court is as good as chance as we're going to get. And then at the same time, you have other people saying, hey, well, maybe they'll allow a voter referendum so they can avoid potentially weighing in on this issue in the future. I mean, ultimately, we know that they didn't do that, but it sets the stage. I mean, you have several governor appointed Supreme Court justices. Colleen Medley, I mean, she was recommended by Solicitor General Noah Purcell. She used to work underneath the governor. You have Theo Angeles he used to work with.
Yeah, and I did a story recently on how Colleen Medley met with Jamie Peterson in September. So the prime sponsor of the millionaire's tax.
Yeah, it just sets the stage. I mean, yeah, the justices will weigh in, try to remove themselves, but
yeah, I think that for people who are kind of like trying to figure out what's going on here, you have a former clerk for the state Supreme Court basically saying that the Supreme Court might issue a legal ruling not based on whether or not a referendum should or should be allowed, but so that they can avoid dealing with a dicey legal ruling, because it's not so much, it's not an issue of whether or not it's difficult for them to rule on whether income is property, because you have all these different, Senator Peterson has spoken out against Colleton, the 1933 decision. What doesn't seem to get addressed is the fact that the state Supreme Court has taken up this issue numerous times. There was a famous state Supreme Court decision in a couple decades after Colleton where they said it's no longer a question to this court whether income is property, and that was 50, 60 years ago. And then you had a decision in 2019 where once again, the courts ruled that income is property. As a result, the progressive income tax is unconstitutional. So the reason why is because there are groups that are so hell-bent on getting this millionaire's tax enacted and getting and then wanting a progressive income tax that, the issue is that our state Supreme Court justices are not, uh, two of them have been appointed, but they're elected positions. So, this is not like the US Supreme Court where they're appointed and they're there for as long as they basically want to be there, and they don't have to worry about the political ramifications of how they, make decisions. Whereas the state Supreme Court justices have to think about how this could affect them. So, you know, that's the context of Carl Smith saying, yeah, they might want to punt on this and allow voters to, uh, weigh in. But it goes back to the point that Noah Purcell said to Jamie Pearson, what Carl Smith is saying to Noah Purcell is that if voters are given a chance to weigh in, they're going to reject this tax. And there's no debate about that. And it's interesting how that's this it's this giant elephant in the room that the public does not want this millionaire's tax. So and these emails just kind of confirm it, but it really is calling into question whether or not the Supreme by saying this, it's calling into question the state Supreme Court's, um, for lack of a better word, their integrity. It's saying, oh, they might make a decision that's based on political convenience, not actually on case law, which is not what they did. Obviously for the record, they rejected the referendum and they cited, longstanding, unanimous legal precedent. So, they obviously didn't take that approach, but it's interesting that a former clerk for them would speculate on that.
Yeah, a former clerk for the court, and then at the same time, I mean, the AGO, the state attorney general's office, it's supposed to be working on behalf of the people that, I
Right.
mean, if you look at the data for the people that showed up at these public testimony or these public hearings for the millionaire's tax, it was overwhelmingly against the tax. Yet you have these same people who are funding this agency, this attorney general's office, fighting against their will, and plotting behind the scenes on how to overturn nearly 100 years of legal precedent. um, TJ, what's next with the income tax? We know the voter referendum was rejected by the court. The court's bound to weigh in on this eventually, when the lawsuit in Clickitat County Court makes its way through appeals and then to the Supreme Court. Are we going to see this on a ballot? I know there's an initiative effort that's launching from Let's Go
Yeah.
Washington. Where are we at with this?
Well, they just launched the initiative process, so they're going to start collecting signatures. As far as this tax is concerned, I think I mean, I'm getting more records back, and I think also I'm I could potentially be getting more records back unredacted because the Attorney General's office weighed in on these records that are, according to the Secretary of State's office, are should not have been released to me. So we're going to see what's going on with that. I've got a lot of other public records requests that are pending. So we could be getting more and more information, but this is really the, the, this is really giving us a inside look at how this tax is being discussed and what's actually going on. And I'm sure for some people who are reading this or listening to this to us talk right now, this doesn't shock them. I think what they might be missing is the fact that y- there's what intuitively, and then there's what you can prove. And these are things that we can now prove and are no longer up for debate. Like the fact that Senator Peterson's millionaire's tax is not intended to put levy a tax on the wealthy and have the wealthy pay their fair share or whatever argument they want to make. The tax was introduced to overturn a legal rule, legal precedent that does not allow progressive income tax. That is the purpose of the bill. So that's now going to shape all debates around this tax and whether it should be overturned or not. Now we've got the Attorney General's office discussing, the fact that the Supreme Court is the most favorable venue that they're going to get, and also discussing whether or not the justices will make a ruling to avoid dealing with, you know, a 95, 93 years of legal precedent. So, that it just we could be getting more and more information on that. So, listeners, stay tuned. This this isn't, it ain't over till it's over, and it's not over.
Well, DJ, we appreciate you shedding light on what's happening behind the scenes. I think a lot of people might think in the back of their head, yeah, it's normal for this stuff to go on, but it's an entirely different thing to have the records to show that that is, in fact, actually happening. TJ, we appreciate your coverage. For anyone hoping to read that, you can catch it at thecentersquare.com. Otherwise, thank you for joining us for another episode of Washington in Focus.
So let's dive in. Today, Let's Go Washington announced their path forward for what they hope will be a repeal of the income tax. We'll put up this to show you that this is going to be IP 26, which is an initiative to the people, and 26 is the year, and the number is 645. So IP 26 645 is an initiative to the people. It states it would provide a straightforward repeal of the tax and give Washington voters the opportunity to vote yes to repeal the income tax. If you haven't been watching us for very long, or maybe not have paid attention to Washington politics, I don't blame you sometimes, but Washington's Democrats, the majority, passed a new income tax. Senate Bill 6346 was signed into law by the governor at the very end of the 2026 legislative session. For now, it's a tax on millionaires whose earned income is in excess of $1 million, or a combined household income in excess of $1 million. And you're taxed at 9.9% on that income. There's no question, based on even supporters of this, that it's likely to end up being a tax on all earned income. Doesn't matter how much money you make in the years to come in the state of Washington. So there's this effort to push back on this and say you can't do this unless you amend the state constitution. So here is Let's Go Washington's Brian Haywood in this morning's press conference announcing their initiative campaign.
This is an initiative that we think is very strong, that will be does a couple of things. I'll outline just quickly what it does. Number one is it repeals the current income tax. Number two, it bans future income taxes, but it's more specific in that it bans both a tax on the income itself or the activity that created the income. And I know that if I was Jamie Peterson, I would be doing this to say this is something that only lawyers can understand. But they've tried to be sneaky in the way that they designed the tax to say, well, it's not really banning, and it's not taxing income, it's taxing the way. We said, we don't care how you define it. Income tax is illegal in this state. And then the final thing that that our initiative does is it actually defines income itself, so there can be no lack of clarity about what the definition of income is, so they can't play games with it. And we put this into Section 82, which is dealing with taxes. So it structurally now it will be in the code, which makes it much harder for the legislature to monkey around and try to thwart the people and insert this income tax.
So Haywood said that their initiative is not going to repeal any of what he called the goodies the Democrats promised in the income tax bill. And mainly this is going to be the expansion of the working families tax credit. That was a huge expansion, so that a lot of when the revenue comes in from the income tax starting in 2028 earnings to be paid in 2029, so that a lot of that would be going to, provide some tax relief to a lot more Washington families. That was something that, they could get behind and support. Well, Republicans, I should remind you, Republicans had a separate proposal to do the same kind of expansion of the working families tax credit without using the income tax as a mechanism to provide that tax relief. So Let's Go Washington is saying that their initiative is going to allow that dramatic expansion of this tax credit and some of the other, goodies, as they call it, in the income tax proposal to remain there, even if the income tax bill is repealed. So, I'll remind you as well that the voters in this state have rejected an income tax multiple times, and our state Supreme Court has also said it is unconstitutional. So, without an amendment to our state constitution, which says that our income is property and must be taxed uniformly, that we can't do it this route. So you can expect likely within the next few days, a week at the most, you're going to see folks out supporting this income tax repeal outside your local Walmart and Fred Meyer and other stores, or at your church or in your neighborhoods. Um, One thing that I did ask Haywood and Let's Go Washington today during their press availability is how they're prepared to respond, because you may recall in 2024, when signature gatherers were out for the two initiatives that'll be on this year's ballot, the one to restore parental rights and the one to protect girls' sports, there were a lot of assaults, vandalism, intimidation of signature gatherers. Many of those ended up resulting in police reports, some that have already, ended up in folks being prosecuted and convicted in some of these cases. He said they're really hoping that's not going to be the case this time around. Maybe people have learned their lesson. And he says there has been no shortage of folks that have been reaching out to them saying, I want to go out. I want to be a petition gatherer for this effort to potentially repeal the income tax. So, going to be watching for that to come in the days ahead. The Washington Department of Commerce today provided the Center Square with a complete list of the daycare providers, their names, their locations, who received a combined 58.7 million in grants last month to expand, to renovate, to provide some facility upgrades to create more childcare slots in the state of Washington. This was touted by the governor, creating more than 2,000 additional childcare spaces through the Early Learning Facilities program. Well, you may recall that up until today, when that list of more than 70 award recipients came out, there were about 20 of them that were simply listed as family home facility, with the city noted without any other identifying information. In some cases, these were facilities receiving millions of dollars, but they weren't named. Well, given what we've been reporting on for nearly 6 months now at the Center Square and other media outlets as well, some of the questionable, inexplicably large taxpayer subsidies going to daycare providers and facilities, there's a lot of questions here about why you'd put out a brand new list of recipients of taxpayer grants without saying who they are. There was a lot of pushback. It did not go over well with Senator Leonard Christian, Republican from Spokane Valley, who told me in an interview that no provider receiving taxpayer money should be unlisted.
I mean, a business is being protected from, then their information being put out there. That just makes zero sense to me. You're a business receiving money, taxpayer money. You're not some, needing to be protected person. You're filing for a, business grant. Certainly that should be there. I know I tried to look into just the daycares in my area so that I can, do a little personal investigation, drive around, and it's almost impossible for me to even get that, even with the staff, to figure out what's going on, who's getting money, what daycares are around our area. I just keep getting referred to a website that just has nothing on it. So it's frustrating even for me, which should be fairly easy. And it should be a quick email. Hey, what's the number of daycares in my district and where are they located? Here's a website that has nothing. Yeah, this is ridiculous.
So now, in hiding some of the providers receiving these large grant awards, we had the Department of Children, Youth, and Families and the Department of Commerce citing a revised Code of Washington, so law in Washington that was results of I think it was a statewide initiative that was passed 10 years ago. It was that came about. Um, it was Initiative 1501, and this was approved by the voters of Washington with a bill that was intended to protect the elderly from identity fraud. And this was, identity fraud and other financial crimes, scams being committed against the elderly, people said, well, yeah, we should certainly protect these people. Their names, their residences, their social security numbers shouldn't be out there for the public at large to have access to. So that was the motivation for that. So then I went back to Commerce and I said, wait, you're citing this RCW as an explanation for why the public should be denied access to who these providers are. And the initial response I was given, and I'll just read this to you so I don't mess it up. Commerce relies on the state AG's office for interpretation of such laws. The best way to proceed to get this information is to submit a public records request, blah, blah, blah. That came from a spokesperson at Commerce. But I went back to them specifically saying, I want a further explanation as to how a law that was created to protect seniors from identity theft is being applied to hide the names of daycare providers receiving large taxpayer subsidies. And the response I received then on Tuesday midday was to say they were reconsidering. Here you see what Amelia Lamb with Commerce sent me yesterday. She said, I just spoke to our public records manager who has received new guidance from the AG's office about this RCW. In response to the new guidance, we will release the full list with the site addresses. I'm expecting to have that from him later today, and I'll share it with you when I get it. Again, that was from Amelia Lamb at Commerce about midday yesterday. I, again, expected to have it by day's end yesterday. When I woke up this morning and checked email, anxious to see it, it wasn't there. Sent her an email. And then about 10:30 this morning, I received that complete list with all provider names and locations. And these include some home daycare providers that were previously unlisted in Yakima. There were several, again, about 20 of them that were previously unlisted are now in the full document sent to the Center Square. And I went back to check Governor Ferguson's initial release the day he announced these awards, the grant recipients. And at that time, we were looking at it going, wait a minute, why are these not identified? Well, when you click on the link today in the governor's initial press release, it includes the updated link to the full list of providers' names and locations. Now, full disclosure, I've not yet had time to look into these newly identified providers to see if any are receiving other potential state or federal subsidies or anything there that appears to be an unusually large subsidy. Some of the other ones that we've identified certainly have raised eyebrows. Again, I have not looked at any of these newly listed award recipients. We're going to flesh that out, though, in the days to come. So let's dive in. Venice AI founder Jesse Proudman has been in Washington State for all of his adult life. He's 41 now. He's been here 28 years. And Venice AI is his third startup. He started his first company when he was 13 years old. Pretty remarkable, very, very bright guy. And I had a chance to interview him today. He loves Washington and he's very involved in giving back in his community. Still got a couple of kids that are in schools here and he doesn't want to leave. But the income tax, he says, for him is, the straw that broke the camel's back. So he is partnering with Let's Go Washington on their initiative, which was launched 2 days ago here in Washington. So I asked him today, why get involved in this and why put yourself out there and go public? Why not just, relocate and stay out of the fight?
I really like it here, and I don't really want to move. And I sort of had the realization that there were two paths. Either I just quietly packed up and left like everybody else is doing, or I became vocal, and nobody else. There are a number of other folks, but not a large population is willing to stick their neck out or have the conversation, and felt like somebody needed to start. So here I am. Yeah, I grew up in Tacoma. I've been a lifelong Washingtonian. I've started multiple businesses here. I started my first business because the startup climate in Seattle in the .com era was so vibrant and exciting, and that that got me fired up. You get entrepreneurs excited about entrepreneurship when there are entrepreneurs around. And so over the last 28 years, I've done my best to be part of the Seattle ecosystem and to kind of pay it back to other entrepreneurs. And then in the midst of, it really seems to start in the midst of COVID, this general shift began to occur where entrepreneurs and the contributions that they make became villainized. And the tech community in Seattle that has been, whether it's sort of high tech, aerospace, or just technology companies in general, sort of the backbone of much of the economic growth of the state, they became the target. And you saw it with the jumpstart taxes, you saw it with the capital gains taxes, and then this kind of final millionaires tax. Really, I mean, it is the straw that broke the camel's back. We've already got an incredibly complex and multi-layered tax climate. We're, I think, 45th or 46th worst tax climate in the country before the income tax is applied. The gross receipts B&O tax on businesses, where businesses are taxed on their top line revenue, not on their profitability, is that always blew my mind as a business owner in the state. And so to then claim that there's not enough money and that the budget can't be balanced without then targeting a very specific cohort of individuals, it's enraging.
So in recent weeks, he has been very public with his criticisms of the anti-business climate in Washington state, the crushing tax burden, and now the pending income tax. He was on Fox News recently. So he's getting a lot of people that are contacting him and a lot of other business owners and wealthy individuals in Washington state. He told me he's been surprised at how many of them really didn't understand that this millionaires tax is going to be crafted in such a way that future legislators could lower the threshold. It could be, down to somebody who makes $500,000, then 250, then 100, then eventually an income tax on all Washington income earners. So he said it's been interesting to him, and he's glad to be part of the initiative campaign because this is going to put it out there publicly where a lot more people were finding out details of this that they didn't even know. So I asked him in the business circles that he runs in, what are others saying about Washington's business climate and the income tax?
Everybody's leaving. And that's been the most surprising thing to me as I began speaking out, was the flood of private communication that I'm receiving from folks who have either left or are actively considered departing. And, I was at an event a number of weeks back, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I tweeted about it, where it was sort of eight couples together. The event ended up being the announcement that the couple hosting had sold their house and they're on their way out. And then everybody else who was there was sort of having the same realization. And people are in various states of process, whether folks have either found places to move or just beginning to think about it. But the reality is this targeted population is incredibly mobile and doesn't want to be living in a place where they feel villainized and targeted. And so when those two things combine, and when the mayor brazenly laughs and waves them off, and the governor claims nobody's going to move, and Jamie Pedersen says there's no evidence of that happening, the reality is that just pushes everybody farther and farther to the breaking point.
And did you hear what former Governor Chris Gregoire said last week? Now, she served as our state's governor from 2005 to 2013. She had 2 consecutive terms. She's a Democrat, in case you weren't around here at that time. And last week, she was invited to speak alongside former Attorney General Rob McKenna at the Association of Washington Businesses Spring Summit. And it was very interesting when she was asked about Washington's kind of ballooning budget and the anti-business climate that has been created by the majority party.
I left office with a budget of $33 billion, and the budget today is $80 billion. I think that's a little bit too much of a growth. And yet, how we find ourselves at the end of every legislative session now is in the hole and projected to be in the hole. I would suggest to you, we don't really have an income problem, we have a spending problem. And we're answering it by stacking one more tax, one more rule, one more regulation. And the one thing that the business community doesn't need is that lack of predictability. That's how businesses grow. That's how they thrive. That's not healthy for our business community at all. As I look, unfortunately, last year at the composition of the Economic Development Committee and the House and the Senate, the one in the House was hard to find. The one in the Senate didn't exist. I asked, when did that happen? Where did the Economic Development Committee go in our state? And they heard, and they created one. Why do I think those are so important? To educate regarding the consequences of the taxes. For example, sales tax on services, anti-big business. Who was hurt? Small business. Didn't understand it, didn't know it, didn't have anybody in the caucus who could explain it, nor was there a committee in which they could really begin to see the consequences of that action.
So Let's Go Washington this week did launch their initiative drive aimed at repealing the income tax. They're going to be out. They've got the next 49 days, only till July the 2nd to gather, they hope, more than 400,000 valid voter signatures to turn in. That they really only need a little bit over 300,000, but a lot of times there's duplicates or people sign when they're not a registered voter. So they have to account for some of those, throwouts from the Secretary of State's office. So off and running on this, they're confident they can get this thing done in the next 49 days. We'll keep you posted.